Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now I will head over to Dr. Alexandra. Dr. Alexandra is a researcher in archaeology and specialist in Buddhist art and archaeology of Gandhara. And she's also working as independent Gandhara project academic advisor at Harvard Cam Lab. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you able to see my screen? All right, so many thanks for such a warm introduction. And first, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for this kind invitation. It is a true honor for me to deliver an online talk on Gandharan archaeology and art under the auspices of the distinguished Lahore Museum, and to address its eminent academic community and wider public in the frame of this international webinar. And it's also a great pleasure to reunite with my respected colleagues for today's panel. So just a few words of introduction. So I was fortunate to work between 2005 and 2012 on the excavation at Bamiyan under the direction of the late and highly esteemed Professor Zemaria Laitarzi. And my main subject of research concerned the archaeological and iconographical studies of the Sangharamas of Ada. So I'm more specialized on the Afghan part of the what we already today called Greater Gandhara. Yeah, for several years now, I've been leading the Ada Archeo database, a project dedicated to this topic, and which is accessible through this QR code. So the art of Gandhara, sacred art in the service of the geography of the Buddha Shakyamuni, wears many faces. It results from various artistic influences, notably local, Indian, Central Asian, and Western, across Asia Minor, Middle East, and Persia, and gives rise to peculiar executions and iconographic specificities according to the region where it developed. And today we will explore foreign influences in Gandharan art, especially borrowings from Graeco-Roman art. Because these influences do not reflect a total assimilation like the Interpretatio Graeca-Romana, this propensity of the Greeks and Romans to assimilate foreign deities to their own deities. Gandharan artists never identified Western figures with Buddhist ones. Instead, Western forms were stripped of their original identity to depict figures from Buddhist tradition. So what aspects then are involved in these borrowings, and how this tells us about the way artists perceived them, what they saw in them, what they retained, what they did not retain, in brief, what motivated their aesthetic choices. So I will present some representative cases, each worthy of its own talk, to explore why Gandharan artists choose specific Western features to depict Buddhist figures, aiming to understand the mechanism of this appropriation and transformation of identity. I'm going to draw numerous parallels between Gandharan and Western world, Greek and Roman, without delving in the long-standing debate over the origin, which was already clearly discussed by our colleague Peter. These comparisons are not meant to suggest direct imitation. Cautiously, I will say that as we are concerned, contact between the West and Gandhara seems to be continuous from Alexander the Great through the Roman period, and the contribution of the intermediate kingdoms from Asia Minor to Middle East and Middle East to Central Asia should not be overlooked. So, and I just a few mention. I did not include the dates of the work from Gandhara on the diaporama, as they are generally dated between the 1st to the 3rd century CE. So let us begin this review with the tutelary couple, the Jainis Ariti and Panchika, whose representation in Gandhara are among the clearest examples of Graeco-Roman aesthetic influence on Buddhist iconography. Their evolution has been studied by Fouché, Fredericks, Quagliotti, Chandra, Tanabe, among others. The following illustrations show their progression from Indian to increasingly Hellenized forms. Ariti, the mother of demon, originally a child-devouring yakshini in Indian tradition, symbolized childhood diseases. According to the legend, the Buddha converted her into a helping deity. She then became a child giver, protector and patroness of children, and linked with a male counterpart, a dispenser of fecundity and wealth. So in accordance with her mythology, Ariti is depicted in the iconography surrounded by children. In this fine depiction, kept in the Lahore Museum, Ariti stands with one hand on her hip, holding a section of her garment, a fine chiton that reveals her maternal forms. She wears an elaborated dress, and children appear perched on her shoulders, one of them dressed like a little Buddha, another clinging to her breasts. And in the second sculpture, housed at the British Museum, Ariti is seated with her foot on a stool. At her feet, children crowd around. A child lying on her lap grabs her necklace. In both works, the headdresses, clothing, and jewelry are purely in the Indian tradition. Ariti's companion, Panchika, is the genie of wealth, fertility, well-being, and prosperity. He is most often depicted as a rich monarch with a purse or a cup, or as a guardian holding a spear or a scepter. Often wearing a tiara, he can take on a paunchy appearance. And in these two sculptures, the first from the British Museum, the second a refound example of in the Lahore Museum, Panchika is depicted sitting on a throne with one foot resting on a stool, holding a spear. Bare-chested and pot-bellied, he wears a paridana, ornate turban, long earrings, and necklaces, all in Indian typical style. He too is accompanied by children pressed around him to reap his benefits. So in the first sculpture, the tutelary couple is surrounded by children wearing headdresses, clothing, and jewelry in the Indian tradition. In the second, they appear strongly Hellenized. Panchika has lost his good-naturedness. He is even skinny. He's dressed in a short tunic and boots, holding a cup. Ariti wears a fine, almost transparent drape and holds the horn of plenty, or cornucopia, Greek symbol of fertility and prosperity. Following Indian tradition, a child grabbing his knee, but he is now alone, and both the hairstyles and the drapery are entirely inspired by Graeco-Roman aesthetic. Even the child, usually emerging between their heads, had been replaced by Vajrapani brandishing the Vajra. So a culmination of this model appears in the figure of Ariti, depicted in the guise of a Greek ticket discovered in the niche V2 at Tapaishuto Ada during Professor Tarzi's excavations. The center of the niche featured a monumental Buddha surrounded by acolytes, including the notable figures of Ariti and Vajrapani. You can see on this picture that Ariti raises her right hand to throw flowers toward the Buddha, holding a cornucopia lined with foliage and overflowing with fruits in her left. She wears a talar chiton tied under the chest with a belt and a cloak covering her legs and shoulder, passing over her back. Tarzi identified her as the Greek ticket type, clearly illustrated in the illustration on the far right. More precisely, its antecedent is found on the Greco-Bactrian coins of Amintas from the Kunduz treasure, where the goddess holds a cornucopia seated on a throne. In niche V2, TK lends a form to represent Ariti, deity of abundance and fertility. And while Indian elements like the children were removed, it is remarkable to notice that, as if in compensation, the artist added a purely Buddhist context by giving her the attitude of Jenny's throwing flowers. So what does this teach us? The Guardian couple's appearance was metamorphosed. Panchika lost his good-naturedness and his warrior attributes a spear in favor of his richness symbol, the purse. However, these attributes were not borrowed but already associated with him. And Gandhāran artist borrowed the appearance and clothing of a Hellenistic king to finger Panchika, maybe by analogy of function of dispenser of wealth and richness. As for Ariti, her acolytes, the children's were replaced by the Greek fertility symbol, the cornucopia. Similarly, its clothing and aesthetic appearance were inspired by the TK model. But the connection between the two protective figures was clearly made by analogy in the symbolism of their attributes. Despite the transformation of their appearance, the iconography of Ariti and Panchika still highlights their aspect of sovereignty, fruitfulness, and wealth. So let us now turn to the complex character of Vajrapani, whose nature and identity remains under discussion and was being the subject of much examination. To name just a few scholars, we may mention Sénart, Busagli, and Lamotte. And so every devotee, especially exceptional men, was believed to have a deity born with them to accompany them lifelong. As such, Vajrapani holds an honored place alongside the Buddha as a protector and servant, often depicted as an impassive figure holding the flycatcher or assisting the Buddha. Early scholars observed that Vajrapani's type varied, sometimes birdless and useful, over time matures or old and birded, likely due to the lack of physical description in ancient texts. Indeed, he is known simply as the Vajra bearer, holding the Vajra lightning as a weapon, and he was thought to adopt the form of local and foreign deities or heroes in art because of this ambiguity. Here are some bas-reliefs showing an undefined, formal Gandhāran Vajrapani, young, unbirded, and not clearly defined, sometimes wearing the same garment of the monks, the Samgati. He is identified by his undefectible attribute, the Vajra, which take the form of a double-ended pestle with rounded ends and often edged. On this relief, Vajrapani takes the appearance of a local donor or warriors, as seen in this example from Ada. He had the look of a mature man with a shaved chin and mustache. His hair is styled in round curls that fall in twists and framing the face. Other works depict Vajrapani as a dairyman, likely inspired by Brahmans, with a long, straight beard, comparable to this exquisite example housed in the Lahore Museum. Whatever the reason, the lack of a specific description, along with Vajrapani's undefined age and appearance, made him a particularly suitable subject for borrowings. And under Western influence, he can take on the appearance of Zeus or Jupiter, Heracles, Bacchus or Satyr, even Hermes, Eros, or of Greek heroes or kings. Here is a first depiction of a Greek-inspired Vajrapani holding the flycatcher and the Vajra at chest level with his left hand. He wears a short, curved tunic inspired by the Greek exonid, leaving one shoulder uncovered, as shown in the image on the far right. His serious face is framed by voluminous curls of hair, and in comparison, this marble statue of Zeus, but I can also shown a statue of Jupiter, Poseidon, or so, and his serious faces is framed by voluminous curls of hair. Vajrapani's clothing, facial feature are clearly inspired by Western models, through the overall aesthetic reflects minimal Hellenistic influences. This relief shows another Vajrapani borrowing the appearance to Zeus or Poseidon, brandishing a fly swatter and carrying the Vajra. Nearly naked, this time both his face and body rendering are inspired by the Western sculpture, compared here to the famous Doryphoros of Polykleitos. The Gandhāran artist attempts, with varying success, to depict anatomical details like torso muscles, ribs, waist narrowing, and belly roundness. Here again, two Vajrapani borrowing their type to Zeus, Jupiter. The rendering of the body, clothes, and faces is more elegant. Furthermore, in this representation of Jupiter holding the thunderbolt on the Arc of Trajan, one can observe the similarity between Jupiter's thunderbolt and Vajrapani's Vajra, which likely explain why Gandhāran artists first brought the two figures together. To some extent, by analogy of form between their attributes, though not solely for this reason, Gandhāran artists adapted the Heracles carrying the mass type to depict Vajrapani. Notably, in art, both can appear young and birdless or old and birdy. But this is important to note that another aesthetic feature absent from formal Gandhāran Vajrapani also attracted artists. This is the leonte, the skin of the Nemean lion Heracles killed during his first labors, an aesthetic attribute they particularly appreciated. This Vajrapani, portrayed as Heracles, reveals strong Western influence. Found in the same niche as the Arititike, his face expresses gravity. Bodied with a mustache and short curls, he is seated on a rock, holding the Vajra on his knee and wearing the leonte knot at the hips, the animal heads resting on his shoulder. Tosi identified this type as linked to Lysippus, Heracles Epitrapesios, especially to its Greco-Bactrian variant seen on Tidemus coins. The depiction of the anatomy, whether in proportional musculature, the flexibility of the garment, and the serious expression, make it a masterpiece of Ada art and the wider Afghan modeling school. In Tapai Shotonishvi tree, similarly, a monumental Buddha is surrounded by figures including Vajrapani, this time portrayed as Apollo or a young Western king. His peplos is fastened by round brooches, and his long curly hair with a diadem frames a birdless, virile face marked by pathos. His flowing brows, troubled eyes, and sullen pout recall the tormented expression of the works of Lysippus, Scopas, and Praxiteles, and have been compared to portraits of Alexander the Great. So given the limited time, I will not go into detail, but will briefly show you a few other iconographic types of Vajrapani. Here wearing the Dionysian festival crown. Here in the guise of Hermes, Eros, or Putti. And finally, possibly inspired by a satyr or a young Bacchus. So this brief and naturally not exhaustive examination of the various Greco-Roman appearance types of Vajrapani allows us to establish a few points. The physical types drawn from a wide range. The connection seems based on analogy in the symbolism and form of their key attributes, the Vajra for Vajrapani, the thunderbolt of Zeus, and the mass of Heracles. Nevertheless, as Tanabe notes, an analogy in terms of personality and legend link Vajrapani and Heracles. To quote his word, the bellicose, quasi-martial, and apotropaic nature, in addition to the qualities of protector or travelers, are shared by the two protagonists. So in conclusion, despite the variety of features and clauses in which he appears, Vajrapani's defining feature is the Vajra, symbolizing his master's magical power and marking him as the Buddha's protector for artists and devotees alike. Let's have a look at the genies holding flowers, ornamental deities who frequently appear in Buddhist iconography, throwing a handful of flowers at the Buddha in many life scenes. For example, two bas-reliefs, as in the Lahore Museum, show devas and genies raining flower petals on the Buddha from the heavens. To the right is a flower genie, flower-holding genie from Tapaikafaria Ada with delicate Indian-inspired features. Using his left hand, he holds a flap of his Uttariya to form a pouch of flowers, mirroring a posture we can already observe on the preceding bas-relief. So this flower-throwing genie, discovered in Tapakalan Ada and famed among Batu's Ada's discoveries, used his right hand, now lost, to draw a whole supply of flowers containing the sinus of his Uttariya, held by the other hand, to shower petals on the Buddha. Despite its exceptional quality, he lacks lakshana or distinctive features, identifying him as a marginal god, serving instead as a typical flower-throwing genie. This artwork has been compared to famous Greek pieces like Antinous as Agathos Daimon or Vertumnus, The Zephyr of the Tower of the Winds in Athens, portraits of Alexander the Great, and some Lysippus work. For a long time, it has been questioned whether this connection reflected a meeting of minds or direct imitation. Fouché rightly demonstrated that intention mattered more than posture and gesture, and in this case, it differed completely. In the Greek world, this posture was an allegory of spring. In Buddhist mythology, it was the common gesture of devas honoring the Buddha Shakyamuni. The Western influence is clear in the supple, symmetrical arrangement of the hair curls, perfect veil of the face, and nervous modeling of eyes and lips. But the Hellenistic influence ends there. The shawl, flowers, apparently jasmine, and jewelry, bracelets, and a medallion held by chains are Indian. And of course, the earlobes are stretched to hold real earrings by pious donors. These purely Indian details reveals a transformation of identity in order to put the image at the service of the Buddhist tradition. The original personality is abandoned, as the Hellenistic appearance is not transposed to an individualized figure. Instead, the artist borrowed features of Greek heroes or gods and adapted them to a generic orant, a Devaputra among thousands. So let us continue by examining genies and demons, key figures among the Buddhist cohort. According to texts, these hybrid creatures, Yaksha, Gandharvas, Navas, Garudas, and so on, can be evil or benevolent, protectors or threats, depending on their mood. In their evil aspect, they are cannibals, often depicted with prominent cannings, bulging eyes, and bristly hair. Some demons representing Mara's army, animal hybrids, vomit slungs or tears of tongues. One shows a bobbing tongue with eye tentacles, other with human faces, bear demonic marks, sharp teeth, flaming hairs. Most grimace with tormented expression, reminiscent of tumultuous expression in Hellenistic works of art. Genies, air genies, yakshas mainly serves as a decorative role along bases, pilasters, or atlas-like figures. Tapaikafaria in Ada the stupa 22 shows them as young, unbodied athletes with tormented expression reminiscent of Hellenistic art. The same for Gandharvas, winged celestial minor devas, who also take the form of atlas-like figures. Here are 3 examples from the Lahore Museum and 2 from Jamal Gari, with strong Hellenistic influence, shows artists drawing on the appearances of Zeus, Poseidon, or Atlas, or athletes. And linking to our earlier examination of Vajrapani, we know this Atlas Yaksha in the guise of Heracles, wearing the leonte knocked around the neck and pose on the torso. Let us finally move on to the representation of the bhikshus and the brahmans. Here, Hellenistic inspiration does not manifest itself in the borrowings of only on the borrowings of appearance or characteristic of recognizable figures from the Western world, but in the style and aesthetic rendering. For instance, the portrait of this elderly monk, the model has accentuated his features with a nervous hand. His face is furrowed with deep wrinkles that cross his forehead, mark his crow's feet, although his cheek and sag his cheekbones, his frowning eyebrows and the put of his mouth express contrariety. And the realism of this wrinkled monk recalls, for example, the rendering of the portrait of Senator Brutus. All we see of the second monk, his face is a drooping brow, wrinkled cheek, and a mouth set in a grimace of severity. A surly expression and striking realism also found in the bust of the old man of Otricoli. This Brahman with a tormented look echoes the work of Scopas, Lysippus, and Praxiteles. It can be compared to the Atlantean Silenus in the Athens theatre and to the bust of Socrates. Half bald, with a bird, moustache, and long hair tied in a parietal bun, his expression conveys pain. This bodied mustache Brahman has long hair with a twisted lock forming a small bun on his forehead. His face is young and thin with high cheekbones, deep eyes, and half-open mouth. At the time of its discovery, he was called the Jesus of Ada. He wears a short-sleeved tunic, seemingly made of leather, and he sketches a gesture that has often been compared to that of the Alexandrian Harpocrates, the Greco-Egyptian deity. His left hand is right to his torso, palm up, while his right hand is raised to his face, index finger pointing toward his mouth. And finally, this Brahman, inspired by the Western philosopher type, is mature and has a serious expression with short, wavy hair without a bun, a moustache and beard. He wears an examid tied at the shoulder, leaving one arm bare, and a second drape, imation or uttarasanga, held in his left hand. So once again, Western themes are borrowed but removed from their original context, and artists transport them to represent the monks and Brahmans of Gandhara. So in the introduction, we wondered what determined the artist to choose the features of a Hellenistic figure to represent a Buddhist character. Through these few examples, it appears that characters were mostly brought together by analogy of symbolism or form of their attributes and posture, but also even if more rarely, by analogy of function, legend, or epiclesis. This is the case for Panchik and Ariti, whose appearance has been strongly Hellenized and whose attributes have been adapted, the purse instead of the spear, or replaced by their Western equivalent, the cornucopia set of the children, and who nevertheless retain their dimension as dispensers of wealth, prosperity, and richness. In the special case of Vajrapani Heracles, the physique that was preferred to represent the Buddha companion, it is both the analogy of form in their attributes and similarity between their legend that has been considered as demonstrated by Tanabe. In addition, artists have drawn inspiration from many other physical types to represent Vajrapani, again by comparison between attributes, but also by aesthetic taste of representation of deities and Western figures. This patterns for Graeco-Roman themes is illustrated by the adaptation of the appearance of Western deities to undifferentiated characters from Buddhist legend, which is accompanied by an abandonment of their initial identity. In the same way, the representation of genies and demons, as well as bhikshus and brahmans, bears this mark in style and aesthetic rendering, especially in regard with the tormented expression. The borrowing is again characterized by an abandonment of the original context and a transposition in Buddhist mythology. Whatever the degree of metamorphosis of these characters from Buddhist legend, the artist adapts all these components in order to put them at the service of the Buddhist face. The attributes, the postures, the clothings and adornments, but also, and they should not be forgotten, the iconographic context of this work. The other figure in the scene, such as the great Buddha seated between Vajrapani Heracles and Arititike, or the Vajrapani above the tutelary couple representation, all of these elements help to create a context of purely Buddhist tradition. This is what artists retained. They borrowed from the foreign aesthetic and iconographic details that appeal to them, then stripped them of their meaning to clothe them with a Buddhist intention. As Fouché said, this is what counts above all in this art, what translates this artist's intention and allows the faithful to identify the scene and the characters, whatever the style chosen to represent them. What the artists do not retain, apart perhaps for the case of Vajrapani Heracles, where they appear to converge, is the identity of the character from whom he draws inspiration. His original personality, his legend, is the symbolism of his own attributes. He diverts them, appropriates them, and integrates them as aesthetic elements in the spiritual context of the Buddhist legend. So as far as stylistic and aesthetic influences are concerned, we can feel the artist's desire to experimentation, their taste for tormented figures and poses, but also their interest in the aesthetic nudity and question of realistic rendering of the bodies, and finally their appeal for horrific art and portrait caricature. Certain foreign motifs or decorative attributes seduce their eyes and even more their hearts because they choose to add their aesthetic quality to the beauty of the wall. It was with this purely Buddhist intention that the artists choose iconographic foreign elements to enrich and embellish their work. And as we said in the introduction, Gandhāran art is a sacred art and its expression was unconditionally in the service of the Buddha. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It was very informative. Thank you so much, Alexandra. It was very informative, and especially with regards to the comparative analysis that you gave. It really, gives a lot of context, about, of course, the Greco-Roman art and from where these influences and from where, from the repository from where these influences actually come. It's good to see them all together. Now I will head over to my second last presentation.